Hey everyone, welcome back to the Out of Spec podcast. What are you up to? I'm just hanging out thinking about Rivian and Volkswagen because they have announced a joint venture startup EV automaker and long-standing automaker that also makes EVs and combustion engines unite for a joint venture. What are the details? What does this mean? In today's episode, I'm going to give you the words from the horse's mouth from the press release about what exactly are the details of this joint venture. And then Jose and Jordan are going to come on the podcast and we're going to chit chat about it. Everything from kind of the strategic move, if we expected it, what does it mean? What does it not mean? Software and hardware implications. And I hope you enjoy it. It's an interesting one and very grateful that Jose and Jordan could come on the podcast. You've seen them before and you'll see them again. All right, let's plug in. This episode is made possible by the support we get from Fort Collins Kia. If you are in the market for any electric Kia, not only do they never add market adjustments, they will deliver your car to you anywhere in the 48 contiguous states for Out of Spec viewers. More information in the link in the show notes. Okay, everyone. Like I said, an interesting joint venture that has come out of the EV space between a long-standing automaker, Volkswagen, and Rivian. As you can see here, these are the details. Rivian and Volkswagen Group announced plans for joint venture to create industry-leading vehicle software technology and for strategic investment by Volkswagen. So they intend to enter a joint venture to create next-generation software-defined vehicle SDV platforms to be used in both companies' future electric vehicles. Okay, so joint venture to create the next gen of this EV platform. Volkswagen Group will invest an initial $1 billion into Rivian, with up to $4 billion more dollars in planned additional investment for a total expected deal size of $5 billion. That's a lot of money to work with when it comes to innovating on EVs. The joint venture is expected to build on Rivian's software and electrical architecture to create, quote unquote, best-in-class software-defined vehicle technology platform. Okay, so $5 billion deal eventually. First starts with one and then another four if they're into it, I guess. But yeah, basically how they frame it is that they anticipate that this kind of partnership will accelerate the development of software for Rivian and Volkswagen Group. It is an equally controlled and owned joint venture to create this next generation architecture and software technology. So it's not technically that it's kind of distinct, right? They're not going to make a Rivian Volkswagen crossover. That's not what this announcement is saying. It says that they have a joint venture that is equally controlled, equally owned to work on the software. I think that's important to note. They're not just going to create a crossover between Rivian and Volkswagen, at least not right now. That is not what this is about. So in terms of timeline, they aim to launch vehicles benefiting from the technology created within the joint venture in the second half of the decade. And in the short term, they're expected to enable Volkswagen Group to use Rivian's existing electrical architecture and software platform. If you've driven a Rivian, if you've talked to Rivian owners or people who have been in Rivians, generally they are praised for their software. And they have built an EV platform from the bottom up. They're a software startup. They're a wholly electric brand. They've got the R1T pickup truck and the R1S SUV. Volkswagen has the ID4 all over in the US. They have the ID7. They have some electric options, but of course, they're not top to bottom electric and electric only brand. What I see from this is obviously Rivian's going to be able to use VW's hookups in the automaker space. There's a lot of benefits there, and we'll talk about that more with Jose and Jordan. As this says, each company will continue to separately operate their respective vehicle businesses. RJ tweeted about it, the founder and CEO of Rivian. The CEO of Volkswagen had a comment that this targeted partnership will benefit customers to create the next leading architecture. Of course, I'm sure they have very big plans, and they will have to see how that unfolds. I'm not sure how complicated it is to have this kind of joint venture, but I do know that there are a lot of benefits, strengths to take advantage of from both sides. They also have their weaknesses. Rivian isn't the fastest charging EV out there. It doesn't have the most, it has pretty good, it's pretty good. It's a pretty well received EV startup. And a lot of people say, okay, this means Rivian probably won't crash and burn for a while. That's billion they're expecting to have invested into their future innovation. Okay. And legacy automaker is saying, okay, Rivian, let's do it. But Volkswagen also doesn't have the absolute best EV options. So we want to make sure to keep an eye on things, see how this comes along. It's a big announcement. I'm sure it'll take plenty of time to unfold the actual outcomes of this. And I think there's a lot to chat about. So let's bring Jose and Jordan in on the topic to see what they think as folks who Jose owns a Rivian. Jordan just spent the last 2 days in a Rivian R1S and has driven plenty of EVs, so they have some perspective to bring to the conversation. Let's go. Okay, folks, we are now joined by Jordan, my friend from Out of Spec, and Jose, my friend from Rivian Tracker. You both have experience with EVs in general, but also with Rivian. Jordan, you've also driven a ton of EVs, including those from Volkswagen. So we're going to talk about kind of what we know, what we don't know, what we think about this, public perception, the strategy here, and all of that. So let's start with, okay, first off, a joint venture to share architecture and software. Did either of you see this kind of thing coming between Rivian and Volkswagen, or really Rivian and anyone else, or a startup EV company and anyone else? Is this a surprise?
I truly no, I did not see this coming. This was very much out of left field. Especially, if you had sat down and told me you must pick another car manufacturer that Rivian would work with, no, Volkswagen would not even be in my top five. Not because they're good or bad, just because it was never something that even crossed my mind.
Yeah, I think, with Tesla, I was like, they're never going to partner with someone. They're too proud or just don't need to, because their software is phenomenal. Rivian, I could see them partnering with someone, but I think, like Jose said, my money wouldn't have been on Volkswagen, but I am not surprised they are partnering with someone, because I think Rivian software just needed a little bit of help, and Rivian needs some funding, but they have an amazing product. And it's been eye-opening to me recently with driving so many EVs, how bad so much of their software is. Like, not Rivian, just other EVs, like other companies, legacy companies that, we've been buying their cars for over 100 years. So they're like, oh, people are going to keep buying them. We don't have to invest much in software. But I think people are starting to wake up to the fact that everyone's praising Tesla and Rivian. So maybe they need to do some work. And so I think this is great for Volkswagen, because as we've probably seen in many headlines over the past 2 years, CARIAD is not the best suit of their company.
No, that's a good point. Yeah, I think we should get into the strengths of each company and maybe the weaknesses and how this could be, why this is a good pairing. But I agree, I didn't necessarily see this coming, but it does seem like people are receiving this as like, okay, this is a good sign for Rivian. They have this big automaker who's been around forever with kind of just deep, deep pockets and all of their, connections around the world with an EV startup that a lot of people generally do like. And I do want to touch on, Jose, like we were talking about before we got on, what is this and what is this not? So Rivian and Volkswagen are not going to have like a baby EV out of this, right? It's a joint venture distinct from both, but they are going to collaborate. So I know that you attended the, what was that? The shareholders call, and that came up and they were like, okay, here's what's true. Here is all the information, nothing more. So can you maybe recap that for us so that we can understand what it is and what it is not?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So yesterday, Tuesday, June 25th, when this announcement went live, pretty impromptu, Rivian sent out a communication to shareholders and investors. Hey, we're going to have an impromptu call to talk about this, which is crazy because tomorrow, Thursday, June 27th, is their actual investor day. So they could have just waited, but sounds like they have a lot more to talk about tomorrow. So they wanted to kind of push this up. But yeah, so let's talk about what this is and what this isn't. I think there's a lot of wish list things that people wish this was. Oh, VW and Rivian are going to make a baby EV, like you said, or they're going to make an EV Scout pickup truck, or something like that. And that's not what this is, right? This is an equally controlled, joint venture that's pretty much strictly focused on software, electronic control units or ECUs, and related network architecture design and development. So we're talking about hardware and software, right? It's there's a reason Wasim, who's the chief software officer for Rivian, jumped on the call yesterday and spoke about it, is because he is kind of leading the venture behind this as well, especially with all the new technology coming into the second generation Rivian, R1 platform. So both companies are kind of trying to work to achieve, cost savings, deliver amazing customer experiences. Like Jordan said, the infotainment system that VW products tend to use is not phenomenal. Rivian decided to go the route of building in-house software and hardware. They could have easily gone the easy route of saying, hey, we're going to adopt Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, and cool. And there's a lot of people who would love that, right? But the reality is, if you build an in-house infotainment system that's integrated 100% into your vehicle, right? Vertical stack integration, so everything is connected and it's all done in-house, you're going to get to build a much better platform. It's going to take time to get there. And yeah, you could potentially, and I don't want to call out other manufacturers, but there's some other manufacturers such as Lucid who doesn't have such a great infotainment system. So they then go and offer CarPlay, right? Apple CarPlay, which is fine, but it's not the best user experience for the end consumer. And I think this is where VW went to Rivian and vice versa. And they're like, guys, we see what you guys are doing. We like what you're doing. We want to have a piece of that cake as well. And by the way, and we'll help you. We'll help invest $5 billion, right, of planned investment into Rivian to help, build the R2, right? The R2, which is coming here in a couple, next year. And is it next year? Yeah, or the year after, soon. And then help with the Georgia factory, right, which is another a project that's kind of been put on the back burner a little bit, just to save money. So I think what Rivian is looking to get out of this is, hey, we're going to give you this stuff, and by the way, we'll see some cost savings in materials. We'll see some operating expenses cut, and then maybe some future opportunities, will be associated. Maybe this is kind of the beginning of that. But for right now, it is just this, right? There's nothing more to it. You're not going to suddenly be able to go take your Rivian R1 to a Volkswagen dealer and get it serviced there, right? I'm sure so many people would love that because it would be very easy and convenient, but that is not what this is. And I've just seen a lot of speculation on the internet about it. And I think it just needs to be very clear that what RJ, the CEO, and the team said is that it's strictly hardware, software, ECUs, architectural stuff for now.
I feel like that would be such a big announcement, and if they were like, we're going to build a car together. I'm like, okay. Right. Sometimes we get a lot of lofty promises from automakers. Let's start with the basics. Jordan, you just spent 2 straight days in an R1S driving from Colorado to Las Vegas and back, and I'd love to know what you kind of think about this. Jose has touched on the strengths of Rivian here a bit. They're software oriented, it's ground up, and they really listen to their customers and they respond quickly. Or Volkswagen is coming with a different background that has its own strengths. But yeah, what do you think about this? What kind of, from the consumer's perspective, but also your perspective as a reviewer, EV expert, what benefits can we expect, but also maybe what challenges do you see here?
Let's just hope this is a blend of strengths, not a blend of weaknesses, because they each do have their own strengths and weaknesses. And I think Rivian, not quite as much as Tesla. Tesla seems to be branded as a software company that builds cars, because it is such a good piece of software. Rivian is not quite slotting themselves into that because I think partially their cars are so interesting. A lot of people think Teslas are good, not necessarily interesting. They're just kind of appliances. Whereas Rivian's really played into that. This is a lifestyle vehicle that you can either live your normal life or go on adventures and do things maybe you wouldn't have done. And they seem to, I don't know, their software is really good, and I can see what they're getting at. They're clearly benchmarking some things with Tesla, which is a good thing. Some people are like, oh, they're just trying to copy Tesla, which is dumb. That's not true, because Tesla is the GOAT, for lack of a better term, of software. And I think Rivian is benchmarking the right company. I think I probably would have assumed Rivian had, earlier days when Rivian and Ford were kind of doing some stuff together, or Ford was a big investor and stuff. I maybe would have thought Ford would partner with them, but being Volkswagen, it's very interesting because Rivian, I think, needs a bit of like not adult supervision, but they just, in some ways, they need more meetings and more functionality. Like their software is so clean, but almost too minimalist in some ways. And I think there's just a few things they could add to improve it. But then Volkswagen software is so rough around the edges, not very user friendly. And it's interesting that people with most Volkswagen products, they're just like, okay, how do I get to CarPlay? And that's all I need, because using any other part of the software is frustrating. Even talking to Colton, our out of spec detailing aficionado, he has a Volkswagen ID4. Now his is early-ish, which means no software updates over the air, and he's not getting the improvements that Volkswagen has made. Because I want to preface, like Volkswagen software has improved over the last couple of years, but not everyone gets to see those improvements. And even their improvements are still far behind where Rivian currently sits. So I think they could benefit from each other. I don't know too much of how Volkswagen is run behind the scenes, but typical German companies, they have too many meetings and they run too slowly. Whereas Rivian, we've seen literal instances where they must have watched an out of spec video and Kyle made a complaint and Rivian's like, all right, let's fix it. Boom, patched. And it's like so cool to see them having this approach of, let's just keep the software juices flowing and just keep bringing improvements. And so from day one Rivian to day now Rivian, I've loved to see the improvements. They could just use, I think, almost a few more like heads in the meeting room, or maybe even some more meetings just to figure out some fine tuning of some functionality. And so maybe that's where the German mindset will help them. And then Rivian might help Volkswagen. Like that to circle back to, I just hope the benefits of both softwares are really shining through this, and I'm afraid of either one slowing them down. Like what I fear is Volkswagen slowing down Rivian's improvements and updates, and we've even seen that with Tesla. And actually, one of my friends left Tesla a few months ago. He was a senior software or senior UI UX designer, and left because Tesla was getting too slow to make changes that used to be exciting. He joined the company because it was exciting. It was like what Rivian is now, where it's like constant new, fun, awesome updates and improvements. And it just got slow and tedious and too many meetings. And so I'm hoping this doesn't turn into that.
Yeah, and Jordan, kind of to piggyback off what you're saying there, one issue, as being so focused on Rivian, there's always a lot of good stuff, but I want to also highlight the negative, or not so negative, but like the so Rivian is really good about promising things and then like either not delivering or taking a really long time to deliver on those promises. And very recently, Wasim, chief software officer of Rivian, went on to Reddit, the subreddit for Rivian, and had a kind of ask me anything Q&A, and there was a lot of promises made that I kind of highlighted on my site on a post. And one of the issues that I had with it is that a lot of these things we've heard already in the past. I've been hearing I've had my Rivian for 2 years of ownership already, and I've been hearing it for 2 years of ownership. That's coming, we joke around about Tesla, being, coming in 2 weeks, right? This year, and then nothing happens, right? The big summer update that was supposed to happen last year that never came, is coming now here soon, but took a year, right, extra to get there. So I hope that this relationship can kind of tidy up a bit, like you said there, where like we just need to get Rivian to be a little bit more organized and stick to promises and deadlines, right? And don't overpromise and then underdeliver on what you want to think, because that disappoints the end user, right? Nobody wins in a scenario like this, because you look like you lied and then we don't get what we want. So I hope that some of this German thought process can kind of be put into there. Like you said, I don't know how VW runs their group, but I would love to kind of just get a little bit more of that organizational structure, whether it's a few more meetings or a few more heads and meetings that go, let's be realistic about what we can actually do.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that y'all both bring up the cultures of the companies and the backgrounds. And it also can't be understated, like the business opportunity that this is. If we look at Tesla, they've been around for a long time. They've been able to do mass production, mass distribution. They have gigafactories everywhere. That's similar to Volkswagen. They have the longstanding history. They have the production systems in place, the processes, the manufacturing standardization that a startup just can't have in, 10 years or 5 years or whatever, like Rivian. I mean, Volkswagen has made millions and millions of vehicles over the years. So I think they can also take the global and historical advantage from Volkswagen and put that in there. And then Rivian has the coming day of age where, yeah, this is our brain baby. We see the future here, right? We can run with all these amazing updates and re-envision transportation, electric transportation, and combine those. But yeah, obviously it's a bunch of money, a bunch of hookups with VW, and then now they can get the insight from Rivian. Very cool. It does make me think of, okay, so what does this mean for the competitive landscape? Are we going to see more of these? We weren't really expecting this necessarily, but then I started to think, okay, Polestar and Volvo, similar but different, where Volvo had an involvement with Polestar, and then now they don't. And Polestar is having to figure out how they work on their own. So we kind of saw it go the opposite way, where a big automaker decided, okay, we're not going to fund you anymore. Let's see if you can stand on your own 2 feet or 4 wheels and roll along. And now it's kind of the opposite. So what do you think about this kind of partnership and influencing the competitive landscape? I mean, do you think we're going to see more of these? Do you think it'll really set them apart? What's
Yeah,
what's going on?
number one, I truly believe that partnerships like this are a net positive for everybody. I can't see a lot of downside to it, right? I recall, and Jordan mentioned it, Ford was an early investor in Rivian, right? And they were heavily involved with Rivian in the very beginning. They decided to drop out, right? They decided to not be investor anymore and go their own way. And why that happened, I mean, we could sit here and speculate all day long about it, right? But Ford builds their own electric vehicles. They're kind of their competition. Though, in my personal opinion, an F-150 Lightning versus a Rivian R1T are very different vehicles and are used very differently. So I don't necessarily see it as competition. But that being said, they are EV manufacturers that compete. I think this joint venture, if this goes well and it gets approved and it's planned and everything goes really well, I could see not only Rivian, but maybe other manufacturers out there wanting to do something like that, lend a hand to. At the end of the day, we want to expedite and help transition the world to electric vehicles, right? That seems to be the motto of most of these companies. I know it's Rivian's, Tesla, and all that. And I think as EV fans that we are, we want to see that happen. The only way to do that, I think, is companies have to help each other, right? And see themselves as less as competition and more as options out there, right? So I only see a net positive for something like this, and hope that we will see more joint ventures or lending of of patents or software or hardware or licensing, whatever it may be, for other manufacturers.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. It kind of reminds me of how in China they made their regulation is that if you're going to come make automobiles, if you're going to come manufacture vehicles in China, you have to partner with a Chinese automaker. So it's kind of like, okay, if you're going to come in, we can benefit from you, but we're also going to benefit our own country, our own market. And this is a little bit different where, a foreign entity is coming into the US, but partnering with Rivian, and just how, yeah, there are benefits that can come from this very clearly. So hopefully, I mean, I see everywhere in this space, from utilities to actual automakers, whatever, collaboration is key, sharing information, sharing skills when we're in a new industry, a new technology like this seems pretty obvious to me. By the way, if anyone's tuning in and you see these orbs floating around me, there's a little disco ball in the window that is the shining light.
I was wondering. I think it's interesting. Back to the CarPlay thing. That's an interesting topic too. Almost a heated debate among some people, because people are like, I've literally heard people that are like, I won't buy a Rivian or a Tesla because they don't have CarPlay. But now GM is going the no CarPlay route. Like, more and more companies not like it's a landslide effect. They're like CarPlay, I think, will just continue to exist. I'm in probably the hot take camp that every car should just, like Rivian, should have CarPlay. Not because it's better. CarPlay is objectively not a great system, actually. And Apple's been riding their own coattails for a long time. That's probably a whole other podcast. And CarPlay is not great. But if genuinely the end consumer is in mind, give them the option. And I think that's been my takeaway from living with a Rivian for a while. There's a lot of little things that the software prevents you from doing, almost because of the oversimplification of minimalism. And that makes for a great looking software experience, but the experience part of it is like you're removing some capabilities that some people might want, and you're almost filtering out some of the edge case ideals that some people have. And so I would be like, just offer CarPlay. You don't even have to make it look great, but I know they wouldn't make it not look great because that's part of the brand identity. You don't want someone seeing the screen. And I have seen a Rivian running CarPlay hacked, and it looked ridiculous because it was not, made to run correctly. And I don't think it looks great in the Ford products necessarily, like the ones with the big portrait-oriented screen, but it makes those customers very happy. But that being said, I guess it's 6 in one and half dozen in the other for me. Volkswagen having CarPlay is almost like necessary because their software is so bad. And so the fact that they have CarPlay, I think, has made maybe Volkswagen software people a bit more lazy, because I know they're not thinking that. Well, maybe they are, and they're just not telling people because it looks really bad to be like, oh, we don't have to improve our software because people just use CarPlay anyways. But that's not a good look at all. So I do hope this is just two companies who are full of brilliant people. There are brilliant minds at both companies, and maybe this is just the blending of brilliant minds that we've needed, because each company does have their own strengths and weaknesses, regardless of what you think as a whole. I mean, just like people, it's like there's always issues and strengths and weaknesses, and hopefully they can help smooth those out with each other. I do like seeing more partnerships between companies. We might see more after this. I mean, we've seen obvious things with like Honda and then the Ultium making that EV, although I'd rather just see Honda make their own EV, because I don't think Ultium's like the end all be all. And I've seen Honda make some incredible products. But then again, it's funding thing. So if this is providing the funding Rivian needed to build me my R3X, so be it. I'm happy. I'm here for it.
I think that it adds a couple of layers, is that there's a lot of uncertainty out there, right? Of like, will Rivian survive? Will Rivian make it to build the R2 or even the R3, right? And Rivian's goal is to hit profitability Q4 of this year, right? Of 2024. And I think it's very possible. So I think that $5 billion is a lot of money, and it's going to help get to that percent, get to that. And Jordan, just to touch base for a second, going back to CarPlay, because I agree, right? I see it every day all throughout the Rivian community. There are people who will fight me about it. And I think CarPlay serves its point. Serves its purpose in certain aspects, but it's not perfect for everything. And I think that what should be really interesting is that, Apple's been working on the next generation of CarPlay, CarPlay 2 or whatever. And Porsche is actually, signed up to be one of the primary early car manufacturers to have it fully integrated to their system. I'm curious how that plays, right? Because Porsche is owned by VW, part of the VW group. So I'm curious how that's going to play into all of this, because and it may not absolutely be, may not actually do anything right now, right? Because in reading about this joint venture, they're talking about the second half of the decade, right? So we're talking about 2026 through 2029. So like there's still time for any of this to happen, or changes and all that, but should be very interesting to see, does VW eventually build such a great platform with the help of Rivian software and all that they eventually also drop CarPlay, right? Do they eventually go, we don't need this anymore because now we have a good platform? Even though I agree with you, Jordan, I think there should be options, but realistically, every company wants to have their own ecosystem and all that, and they don't want to have somebody else come in and like take over their screens. So
yeah, it'd be interesting if it went that way, or ironically the other direction, where Rivian intentionally refuses to touch first gen CarPlay because why are we still on basically first gen CarPlay almost 10 years later? And it'd be hilariously interesting if Rivian finally worked with Apple on that once the second gen CarPlay is integrated, because that's the CarPlay that allows you to actually interface with the vehicle.
Yep.
And it's almost just like a skin of the existing vehicle capabilities, dumbed down and simplified, which is a lot of ways is what an iPhone is too. Like people give iPhones crap. It's like, oh, this is too simple. I can't do all the really interesting tweaks and adjusting things like I can on my Android. And actually, that reminds me of Rivian software in a lot of ways. It's just so simplified that it's mostly user friendly. There are still some annoying things for me with the navigation, and in those cases, I would rather just use CarPlay, especially now that CarPlay is getting more integrated with route planning and stuff for vehicles. So I don't
especially
know what
with EVs,
right? And I don't know what a good future looks like with CarPlay, because it is kind of like it's relying on symbiosis of like the Apple developers and the vehicle developers. And that's just a whole level of complexity that I don't think most people want to even think of handling. So that's a whole other podcast debate, really. But I'm overall excited about this venture, this joint venture, because I do see good in Volkswagen's products, even though there's been a lot of negative press with Carriot. But even then, we've seen improvements. I mean, I've been using, or I used the the ID7 software. Its route planning was okay-ish. The software was fine. It's just like not quite there. But honestly, Rivian's is not quite there either. It's just it's better, hands down. Volkswagen's, but it's like if any car maker is like, our software is perfect, we don't need help. Those are the car makers I kind of question. And interestingly, recently that was kind of me and Kyle were filming with Cadillac, and their take on over-the-air updates was kind of scary. They're like, well, why would we need over-the-air updates if we deliver a perfect product? It's like, that's not what the consumer is like looking at, especially the young aspiring professional that you think this car is targeted to. So I love Rivian's approach. I love Tesla's approach. They would never do anything together. So it's interesting to see Rivian maybe like what if Rivian surpassed Tesla in terms of the consumer mindset of this is the perfect software. And if they did that with the help of Volkswagen, how cool an underdog story is that?
Yeah.
I do think that's cool. Go ahead.
No, sorry. I was going to say, before you take over, I was going to say, and I think, Jordan, what Rivian is now trying to do with their new language design, right, with the self-shading on the vehicles and the new software, is trying to be more different than Tesla, right? I feel like that before it was like, yeah, it's just a clone of what Tesla has with less features and all that. And now it's like, okay, we need to separate ourselves, right? We need to be unique. And I think that's what they're going for, is how do we become unique? Because I agree with you. The Rivian software is not perfect. It's missing a lot of things that just basic nerds like us want. And when I've talked to Rivian, Wasim or the other software people, they're like, oh, well, we want to give all that stuff, but like not every, like the general public doesn't care about that. And I mean, I don't know if that's 100% true. Maybe they do, maybe they don't, but I know that I do. So at least have it as an option, right? It doesn't have to be presented as the default, but maybe have a toggle somewhere that says developer mode, and it unlocks like this advanced, stuff, and I can see all the fun, nerdy stuff. And then regarding Cadillac thinking that they have a perfect product, that's like saying, it's like Apple saying, that sounds like such an Apple thing, right? Like it's like Apple selling you an iPhone and going, this is perfect. We will not be updating this phone now for 3 years. If you want a new one, you're just gonna have to buy a physical new phone in 3 years. It's like, that's crazy. No, stop it.
Yeah, unfortunately, Cadillac does have OTA. Like it could have been worse. They could have been like, we don't even do OTA. So I hope this is. I don't know. You're right. Rivian's software is mostly there, and I think I like the direction they're going with it. And I also like the R1 updates get me excited, because that to me felt like Rivian understands some of the important components of software, which is the hardware, and it's really annoying. Like Ford is a great company, and I feel bad because I've ripped on them a lot lately, but you should not get into a brand new 2024 Mach-E and have laggy software, because the computer powering the system is too weak. And then there's Rivian saying this is the most powerful freaking computer in like any car. That's the way to go. Like, sure, it will add a little bit of price, a little bit of cost to the end consumer, but the amount of happiness to the end consumer, not having to tap on the screen and then wait for something to load for a bit. That's, I think, if you ask any consumer if they would pay a few extra whatever on the price of the car to have software that will be future proof with the hardware.
Yeah.
That's the way to go. Like, in theory, the fastest your software will run is day one. And then with continual updates, with more features trying to be crammed onto a computer that could barely handle the original software, like we saw with iPad 1, Watch 1, like all the early Apple products and other companies as well.
Yeah.
You have to future-proof that hardware more, and I think that's what Rivian's doing. So I feel like Rivian gets it, and that makes me really excited for R2, R3, and beyond.
Rivian also has great experience. You know, they've built an EV from the bottom up. They've got the experience. We've seen how the differences with the R2 versus the R1 are going to be, or no, that's just the second gen of the R1, actually, right? So how many differences there are there. So I also think that that's really interesting.
Because it is interesting. Like Jose mentioned, you know, Porsche is part of Volkswagen Group and has just the best charging on the planet.
Yeah.
Well, ish. There's some other companies in other countries doing really great things too, but just headlines upon headlines of this is how every car should charge. So I don't know enough about the insides of Volkswagen Group and how much is actually shared, other than I don't think it's as much as people think. So I would love to see this somehow proliferate. Like, maybe Volkswagen's watching Porsche and being like, dang, why are they like killing it over there? And Rivian might be future thinking enough to be like, hey, maybe we should start benchmarking that. Like, we've already benchmarked good software. Okay, we've got that ball rolling. We've got more capital now with a big legacy manufacturer. Like, what else can we start tackling? And who else can we partner with if it takes that? Like, maybe more automakers will start partnering with other companies that aren't even an automaker. It's like, you know, maybe some energy company that just has so much proficient knowledge on battery storage and how the electrics can work and battery chemistry and how that can benefit a car. Like, there's so many companies that aren't the OEM that help OEMs. So I'd love to see, I mean, who knows? There's so many partnerships that can happen. There's so many that might be happening and just not like super public. Like, a lot of people didn't even know Magna worked with all these OEMs. It's just, people just look at the company and they're like, I'm buying the car from this company. They probably did everything. But no one really talks about tier two suppliers and all the other underpinnings. So it'd be great to see them improve. I mean, the charging is such a big deal. And I think there's a lot forthcoming on our Out of Spec motoring channel on, you know, just comparing different EVs, racing to Vegas and back, how their software interacted, how their charging affected everything. Like, that's no news either, though. We've done a lot of videos on, I think, how much more important charging is than range, but everyone seems to hyper focus on range.
Yeah,
100%.
I agree. And I would love to see, again, this is pure wish list, but I would love to see the Taycan's ability, charging and battery capacity and all that come to a Rivian vehicle, right? That would be phenomenal, because one of Rivian's Achilles heel is definitely their charging curve, and like thermals are not good. And you know, I look forward to Out of Spec doing reviews on the Gen 2 R1 to see if anything did improve, though I'm not going to be very optimistic about it, to be honest. But that would be phenomenal, right? And I think something that we haven't even touched on, and I just want to briefly talk about, is Volkswagen obviously is a company based out of Germany, right? They're European. Rivian wants to get into that European market with the R2 and the R3. Is this someone who can help them do that? No, you know, we're talking about right now just being, you know, strictly hardware and software stuff, but in the future, could they be a stepping stone to help Rivian get to build a factory out, maybe in Germany or somewhere in Europe, right, in the EU, and be able to bring over the R2 and the R3 like they plan on? Who knows, right? Speculation, but it is something that could strongly be, you know, in the back of RJ's mind. Yeah.
And then how do you try to plan ahead for that? Have some foresight, even though it's like we don't even exactly know how we could get there. But if we were, which way would we go? And speaking of like the future, what I hope that this kind of joint venture collaboration brings is obviously more innovation and more competition. There's a huge focus, within the US borders? Can we become a competitive EV battery market? Can we do it ourselves? Well, we're going to charge you if you don't, basically. Also, what does this mean? Hopefully faster advancements in EV technology, from the charging to the battery technology to the software, and also hopefully affordability. Tesla obviously has got that down. They've able to take down those prices. They started with a ton of money. They started long ago. So does this kind of joint venture mean that for us? I think if it doesn't, I'm going to be pretty sad. That's the whole goal here. Better and cheaper.
Yeah.
So, all right, Jordan and Jose, I feel like we covered a lot of things. We'll have to just keep seeing. I remember when the R2 news came out, we were like, okay, we're going to have to wait for till 2026 to see what Rivian does by then. What's going to happen in between? Well, here's another instance of what they're doing in between before R2.
Well, and we didn't even talk about the fact that this happened kind of after hours yesterday. So the stock after hours jumped 30-40%, which was just phenomenal for folks who are invested in Rivian. So I'm not a stock person. I don't talk about it often. I don't really care about it personally, but like, I know there are people out there who do, and to be able to see it jump up and just kind of, it was the industry and Wall Street took it positively. So that was really good.
And Jose, I think you mentioned like this was before a major meeting that's happening tomorrow. So it's like,
seriously,
what else was going to be announced? And yeah, I think that was one misconception from the R2 and R3 unveil, was everyone's like, oh my gosh, like we have nothing to talk about with Rivian for the next couple of years. It's like, nope. There's still a lot. I mean, obviously R1 on like refresh and stuff is all recent news. This is big news. There's a lot of time, almost 2 years before R2 is launched. I really hope that's on time, because that was a huge, I think, issue with that unveiling, is like unveiling of this far in advance.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, sure, everything right now seems relatively competitive, not necessarily class leading in many ways, but like what are the other manufacturers going to do in the next 2 years that's going to make them then leapfrog Rivian before Rivian even gets this product out?
Mm-hmm.
And will Rivian put it out at the really impressive price that they quoted, or will that go up with whatever else happens in the economy in the next couple of years? So there's a lot riding on other things like this, other improvements, and even just keep making your existing products better. Like there's so many things, there's so many happy customers right now, but like, keep them happy. Don't burn any bridges, and because these are all customers who might be looking for another vehicle in 2 years, and Rivian knows that.
Yeah, for sure.
Very true. Thank you, Jordan and Jose, really so much for coming onto the podcast and speaking to me today. Maybe after the next call, we'll have something else to chat about.
I'm sure we will.
Yeah. Thanks so much. And thanks everyone for tuning into the Out of Spec podcast. Did we spark any questions in your head? What do you think about this kind of collaboration? Is it the key to a better EV future? Let us know in the comments. We'll see you next time on the next episode of the Out of Spec podcast. Drive safe, stay charged. Bye-bye, y'all.